It was a freezing December night in 2009. The wooden door creaked open, and the sound of firefighters' boots echoed across the damp, cold floor. The air inside was so bitterly cold it felt like even time had frozen. In the dim, flickering glow of a yellow bulb, they saw her a fragile figure, hair soaked and tangled, clinging to her face with streaks of blood and mud. Her ribs stood out sharply beneath skin so thin, it was as if you could feel her weakness just by looking. At first, they thought she was just a little girl, maybe 8 years old, but the truth hit harder than the cold. This was Jeanette Marie Maples, 15 years old, weighing barely more than 20 kilograms. Her body was a map of bruises, scars, and the silent testimony of months of unthinkable suffering. This wasn't an accident. This was the last chapter in a long journey of pain and deprivation, the story of childhood dreams locked away in darkness. What follows isn't just the tragedy of one young girl. It's a warning, a reminder of how a system meant to protect children can fail them in the most devastating way. And it leaves us with a question that's hard to look away from. In a modern world, how can a child disappear from everyone's sight until it's too late to save her? Jeanette was born into a family already marked by cracks. From the very beginning, she never felt the warmth of arms pulling her close or the tender gaze most children take for granted. Angela, Jeanette's mother, rarely hugged her, seldom held her gaze, and almost never whispered to her or smiled. Whenever Jeanette cried, Angela's eyes didn't show worry, they carried a simmering irritation, as if the sound of her daughter's sobs touched an old, unhealed wound buried deep inside. If there was love, it passed like a fleeting shadow. The distance between mother and daughter was sharp, cold, and unyielding, for a child just beginning to make sense of the world. That void planted an unspoken question in Jeanette's heart. Why isn't my mother like the others? The answer traced back to Angela's own childhood, a life shaped in violence. When she was only 5, Angela's mother was brutally murdered. Her father, tied to the criminal underworld, escaped charges and abandoned her to hunger and beatings. From then on, Angela learned a twisted language that power meant control, and control often came hand in hand with causing harm. As an adult, Angela married Anthony Maples, a man addicted to drugs and frequently absent due to run-ins with the law. Inside their small home, the weight of survival, the ache of loneliness, and the violent shadows of Angela's past brewed into a constant storm. Having never known love herself, Angela struggled even more to offer it to her daughter. From the moment she was born, Jeanette grew up between two hollow figures, a mother haunted by a crushing past, and a father who existed only on paper. Jeanette's childhood was a string of tense, brittle days. Her father was rarely home, and whenever he did appear, it was only to vanish again behind the familiar bars of another sentence. In those empty stretches, Angela bore the weight of raising 3 children alone, trapped in financial strain. It took so little for her temper to flare a spilled glass of water, or even Jeanette's silent presence, and Angela's eyes would lock on her daughter, finding a reason to lash out. The quiet in Jeanette's gaze seemed to reflect Angela's own failures back at her, and that reflection made her erupt. The slaps, the shouting, became a warped kind of ritual, a way for Angela to convince herself she still had power over something in a life that was otherwise slipping through her fingers. Her husband's absence carved the bitterness deeper, dredging up memories of her own loveless childhood. That cycle, the absence of affection passed down from one generation to the next, tightened its grip. For Jeanette, any sense of safety was at the mercy of her mother's moods. She learned to shrink into herself, to stay quiet, hoping obedience might buy her a scrap of love. She was always silent, like she knew crying wouldn't change anything, one neighbor recalled. But that silence only made her more invisible to those who should have protected her. By 1995, when Jeanette was barely a year old, the harm was no longer just in the air she breathed, it had marked her small body. In the California apartment complex where they lived, neighbors began to notice the recurring bruises, the nights filled with her endless crying, the sight of a child always hungry, with wide searching eyes that never seemed to find what they were looking for. What began as whispers between residents slowly turned into action. Reports to Child Protective Services CPS led to an investigation, which quickly confirmed the truth. Angela's home was no longer a haven, It was a place where neglect and violence lived side by side. The decision came swiftly. Jeanette and her two brothers, Anthony Jr. and Brandon, were removed from their parents and placed into the foster care system. To CPS, it was a necessary act of protection. To Jeanette, though she couldn't yet grasp the full meaning, it felt like a door had suddenly opened, letting her escape the suffocating air she had always breathed. It was a rare victory, a brief pause in the cruel cycle, a chance to be safe for the next 5 years. Jeanette experienced something for the first time, the feeling of being loved. For most children, it's a given. For her, it was a fragile gift. Along with her brothers, she was sent to Sacramento, California, where they found shelter in the arms of a kind-hearted middle-aged couple. Their new home was a heaven. She had never known the smell of fresh bread drifting into every corner, the scent of soap from clean towels, the softness of a bed wrapped in a warm quilt. The foster mother read fairy tales, her voice as gentle as a lullaby. The foster father held her hand with quiet patience, guiding each pencil stroke as she drew butterfly wings. "You're safe now, sweetheart," he told her, and for the first time, Jeanette believed it. At first, she still flinched at sudden noises, pressing herself close to her brothers when night fell. But love, like cool water, began to soak into the barren ground of her heart. She started smiling more, writing poems about a golden house and wings to carry me to the stars, sketching them in colored pencil. In the afternoons, the three of them chased fireflies across the yard, shared secrets over melting ice cream bars. Yet nightmares still found her. In restless sleep, Jeanette would hear Angela's shouting, feel the gnawing hunger of her early years. One night, waking in tears, she clung to her foster mother and whispered, "You won't send me back there, will you?" A question that was part plea, part fear. 6 years passed, and Jeanette began to believe she would stay forever in the place of fresh bread, gentle lullabies, and the guiding hand that helped her draw. But in 2001, a court decision shattered it all. Angela, after completing parenting classes and therapy, convinced the court she had changed, with the stated goal of reuniting the family. CPS and the judge granted her custody of Jeanette when the girl had just turned 7. Her brothers, Anthony Jr. and Brandon, still carried raw memories of violence. They refused to return, writing letters pleading to stay with the foster family. Jeanette read their words but couldn't fully understand. Her young heart clung to the hope that this time would be different. In her mind, she pictured a new mother, gentle, smiling, arms open to welcome her back. She packed her poems and drawings, believing she could unlock Angela's heart. But for Angela, regaining custody wasn't driven by maternal love. It was fueled by a desire to beat the system she believed had stolen her child. The day Jeanette left her foster home to return, she didn't know she was stepping out of the only safe embrace she had ever known. The door closed behind her, sealing away her peace. Ahead lay a house that was not a home, but a trap, its walls slowly closing in around her life. When Jeanette returned to live with her mother, there was someone new in the house, Richard McCanney, Angela's new husband. He appeared almost out of nowhere, as if someone had simply written him into the next chapter of her life without warning. Richard was a truck driver, with a sturdy build and a deep voice, sometimes accompanied by a friendly smile. In those first days, he asked her about school, rested a gentle hand on her shoulder, and even gave her a silver dollar to buy candy. For Jeanette, those small gestures were enough to spark a fragile hope. Maybe this would be the beginning of a real home. She pictured family dinners with her mother smiling, and Richard becoming her new protector. But that hope vanished quickly, like a drop of water sinking into hot sand. When Richard was away on long hauls, Angela returned to her original storm. The house with its faded curtains and creaking wooden stairs became a battlefield. Jeanette learned to hear her mother before she saw her, to recognize the heavy footsteps, the quickened breath, the slam of a door. Those sounds sent her heart racing, her whole body tensing like a small animal catching the scent of a predator. A spilled glass of water, a delayed answer, even a hesitant smile could be the spark. The first slap was always ice cold, stinging sharply before it burned. But the pain was never just on the skin. It came with a tightening in her chest and a suffocating wave of shame. When the slaps turned into punches, and then into the sting of a belt lashing her back, Jeanette felt as if her body was being broken into separate pieces, each carrying its own shard of pain. Angela didn't strike at random. She aimed for the old bruises, making each blow a reminder you will never be allowed to forget. In those moments, Jeanette didn't cry out. Her tears slipped silently down her cheeks, mingling with the pounding of her heartbeat in her ears. She learned how to disappear inside her own body, staring at the floor, fixing her eyes on a scratch in the wood, or imagining birds flying over the ocean, anything to carry her mind away from the moment. When Richard was home, he often just glanced over and looked away. "Your mom has her reasons," he would say, a mantra to free himself from responsibility. His silence taught Jeanette a truth she wished wasn't real. No one was coming to save her. Her world shrank into survival strategies, stepping lightly so the floor wouldn't creak, holding her breath when Angela was near, finding dark corners in the house to hide. School became a temporary refuge, where she wrote poems about birds and the sea, letting her pen draw a doorway out. But even there, classmates noticed her frail frame, the worn-out clothes, the bruises she never explained. Angela's control tightened, cutting Jeanette off from all contact with the outside world. The girl's voice slowly faded, as if every word she wanted to speak was trapped behind four walls that imprisoned not only her body, but her soul. In 2008, Amber Davis, one of Jeanette's classmates, began to notice what the adults around them seemed to overlook. In Jeanette's empty eyes, in the pale skin mottled with bruises, Amber saw a silent plea for help. She did what many others wouldn't. She reported it to Child Protective Services CPS. That report was like a beam of light cutting through the darkness that had consumed Jeanette's life. When she heard CPS would be visiting the house, her heart sparked with hope. If only for a moment. Maybe this would be her way out. Maybe, this time, someone would see the truth behind the closed door. But Angela was a master of perfect performances. The day the social worker arrived, she appeared with neatly combed hair, tidy clothes, and a voice as sweet as honey. Her hand rested on Jeanette's shoulder in what looked like a gentle gesture, but the faint pressure of her fingers was an invisible threat. "Don't say a word." "Jeanette's just clumsy." Angela smiled, her eyes glinting with cold control. "She likes to make up stories for attention." Jeanette sat quietly beside her, hands clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. She could feel every heavy thud of her heartbeat, each one a warning. "If I speak, I'll pay for it." The social worker's questions passed by like distant echoes. She wanted to answer, to scream the truth, but her throat was locked shut by the image of the beating that would follow. The social worker didn't recognize the fear hidden in her shallow breaths or the tremor in her small hands. They scribbled a few brief notes before closing the file. Not enough evidence. That night, as the door closed behind the social worker, Angela's mask dropped instantly. "No one believes you," she hissed, and the belt came down hard across Jeanette's back, each strike leaving a red, burning welt. "No one wants you." In the dark room, Jeanette bit her lip until it bled, holding back any sound. She knew that if she cried out, Angela would only take more pleasure in it. The silence that night wasn't just fear, it was the moment the last fragments of hope were buried. From that day on, Jeanette's poems, once bright with light, turned completely to shadow words about loneliness, about a girl fading away, as if the world had already forgotten her. By the summer of 2008, the name Jeanette had all but vanished from any trace of the outside world. To neighbors and old friends, she seemed to have disappeared as if she had never existed. A letter sent to the school announced she would now be homeschooled, severing the last fragile thread that connected her to freedom. No more classrooms, no more playgrounds, no more familiar faces, and no one, not a single person, knew where Jeanette was or what was happening behind the silent walls of the old, weather-worn house on the outskirts of Eugene. That house, a low, box-like structure with peeling paint and frayed curtains closed around her like the lid of a coffin. The air inside was thick with the smell of dampness. The old fan screeched in a slow, uneven rhythm, as if reminding her that time here moved sluggishly. Leading nowhere, light crept in through narrow cracks, turning into drifting motes of dust, a light she could only look at, never touch. From inside, she could still hear the laughter of neighborhood children outside, but for her, it was the sound of a universe impossibly far away. Inside, everything was locked in both the literal and figurative sense. Angela locked the kitchen, chained the faucets, and sealed the pantry. Hunger gnawed at Jeanette until she drank from the cold toilet bowl or the dirty dog dish water with a metallic tang of rust and the aftertaste of despair. Every swallow was a reminder that she had no choices left, that her worth had been pushed to an unthinkable low. On worse days, Angela forced her to consume things never meant for a human being. Her voice like ice, "This is where you belong." From then on, a dark corner in the house became the epicenter of her worst hours, just a patch of splintered floorboards and stained walls. But for Jeanette, it was a place where all pain converged. The belt came down again and again, until deep crimson welts stretched across her skin when the wooden ruler broke. Angela replaced it with a tree branch, leaving raw, splitting wounds. Pliers dug into her lips and thighs, leaving infected, burning sores. When the smell grew too strong, Angela coldly took a knife to the damaged skin, filling the room with the stench of blood and scorched flesh. Jeanette was forced to lie on a piece of cardboard, stained dark with old marks, her body a map of injuries, each one carrying the message that resistance was pointless. When neighbors knocked, Angela covered the marks with makeup and turned the TV volume high to drown out the muffled whimpers. She even roped Jeanette's siblings into the cruelty, forcing them to watch or participate, with the chilling warning, "Do it, or you'll end up like her." By now, the house had become a stage for cruelty, where silence played the role of an accomplice. Jeanette, the girl who once wrote poems about the light curled in on herself, her world reduced to the creak of old floorboards, the throb of unending pain, and the suffocating presence of fear with no way out. In October 2009, for Jeanette, the door opened and Lynn McCanney, Richard's mother, stepped inside like a strange breeze from a world she thought she had lost forever. Jeanette was still standing in punishment, her face toward the wall, feet numb, her back arched from exhaustion, yet her eyes shifted slightly, sensing that someone was watching her. That gaze was nothing like what she was used to, not annoyance, not contempt, but shock laced with sorrow. In that moment, Jeanette felt a fragile warmth slip into the cold emptiness inside her. An adult was truly seeing her. Lynn stood frozen, her heart tightening as she took in the sight of the girl's skeletal frame, swollen lips, and the rigid, statue-like posture. No explanation was needed. She understood instantly that Jeanette was fading away in this house. That very day, Lynn left with the haunting image burned into her mind and immediately made an anonymous call to CPS. She was torn between fearing Angela's wrath and desperately wanting to save the child. But the report was brushed aside as not severe enough, and no follow-up ever came. When Jeanette overheard Angela on the phone and realized no one would be coming, the small spark of hope she had felt flickered out. She quietly returned to her narrow world, whispering into the darkness a line of poetry, "No one's coming." Angela, on the other hand, took it as a victory. In front of Lynn, she kept her faint smile and sugary words, but once the door closed, her eyes turned cold. Power surged through her as she realized the system had sided with her, and she unleashed her fury on Jeanette. The first shout was a warning. The punishments that followed were meant both to teach her for making up stories and to remind her that no one could save her. By the end of 2009, the cruelty crossed its final threshold. During one punishment, Angela struck Jeanette hard in the head, making her stagger, her vision blur, and her words falter. Angela didn't stop when Jeanette collapsed. She yanked her up by the arm and kept hitting, her gaze as cold as stone. In Angela's eyes, Jeanette was no longer her daughter. She was an obstacle to be removed. Jeanette's cries grew faint, dwindling to shallow, uneven breaths. The house, with its dull yellow light and damp, stale air, became an entire universe of confinement. Escaping was no longer a hope. It had become a dream she no longer dared to dream. On the afternoon of December 9, 2009, Jeanette lay curled on the cold floor, her breath as fragile as a thread about to snap. She no longer had the strength to cry or call out, only scattered thoughts drifted through her mind a sunlit playground. A birthday cake once lit with candles, a sky where her wings could carry her to Portugal or France. But reality was nothing more than four suffocating walls, so silent that the sound of Richard dragging furniture in the next room to hide the evidence cut through the stillness like a blade through her final moments of peace. Angela, her eyes dry and unfeeling, left the house to buy McDonald's as if her daughter's life weighed less than a burger. Richard, without a hint of tenderness, wrapped Jeanette in a sheet of cold plastic, a layer sealing her away from a world that had never truly embraced her. In the pale light, Jeanette's eyes wandered upward to the ceiling, where a narrow crack let in the faintest beam of light. She wanted to reach for it, but her body no longer obeyed. In that moment, Jeanette's heart stopped taking with it the simplest dreams a child could have to live freely and to be truly loved. Hours after Jeanette had drawn her last breath, Angela and Richard finally picked up the phone to call 911. Angela's voice carried no urgency, no tremor, just a steady, hollow cadence. As if reciting a story she had rehearsed, she spoke of a sudden fall, carefully avoiding any mention of the months of abuse. Beside her, Richard kept his eyes on the floor, occasionally chiming in with distracted confirmations, as though his only goal was to get the call over with. When the firefighters crossed the threshold, it was as if all the air was sucked out of the room. For a few seconds, they froze, unable to believe what they were seeing. Before them lay a teenage girl, skin stretched tight over jutting bones, her body a lattice of fresh bruises layered over old scars, a living testament to sustained torture. The stench of infected wounds, dried blood, and mildew hit them so sharply that one firefighter had to turn away, swallowing hard. No one spoke at first, then a single, hoarse whisper escaped. "Dear God, she looks like she just walked out of a death camp." The silence that followed lasted only a moment before it shifted into a slow-burning anger, a wave that rose as their eyes met Angela and Richard's. Angela stood with her arms crossed, face like stone, no tears, no movement toward her daughter. Richard exhaled, frowning in irritation, as if the rescuer's presence was an inconvenience rather than a tragedy. In that instant, the firefighters understood they weren't simply there to rush a child to the hospital. They were standing in the middle of a crime scene, with the perpetrator still present, calm amidst the wreckage of her own child's life. Jeanette was taken to the hospital, but the doctors quickly confirmed what everyone had already sensed the moment they saw her. That flame had been extinguished long before her heart stopped beating. On the very night Jeanette was pronounced dead, Eugene police sealed off Angela and Richard's home. The stained walls, the stench in the air, and the blood-speckled instruments of torture painted an undeniable crime scene. Investigators collected cracked leather belts, a splintered wooden ruler, a branch with bits of flesh, and blood-stained pliers, all carrying Jeanette's DNA. Medical records confirmed the horror: a punctured skull, infected wounds so severe that bone was exposed, and more than 200 marks, old and new, covering the body of a girl who weighed less than 23 kilograms. During interrogation, Angela remained eerily calm, repeating over and over that she fell and she hurt herself. Richard tried to play the role of an uninvolved bystander, claiming he just drove trucks and didn't know anything. But text messages and witness statements revealed he had been present during many of Angela's beatings, even discussing ways to hide Jeanette's condition. Police also pulled records of CPS reports that had been ignored in the past, building a clear picture this was systematic torture, carried out over years, with both active and passive complicity from Angela and Richard. On December 15, 2009, prosecutors formally charged Angela McCanny with first-degree murder, torture, and severe child abuse. Richard McCanny was charged with complicity, failure to protect a child, and obstruction of justice. Both were arrested at home, their faces devoid of emotion as they were led away in handcuffs in front of neighbors who now stood in silent outrage, only just learning the truth about the girl who had disappeared right next to them. The trial of Angela and Richard McCanny, which began in August 2011, was a crucible of both horror and justice. The Johnston County courtroom was thick with tension, pain, and anger hung in the air as the story of Jeanette slowly unfolded. Prosecutor Elizabeth Grant, her voice trembling but resolute, opened with a stark declaration. This was not discipline. This was torture calculated, cruel, and carried out over years. She pointed to Angela as the mastermind, Richard as the silent accomplice. The evidence read like a haunting inventory: a 22.7-kilogram body covered in more than 200 injuries, a punctured skull, an exposed thigh bone, missing teeth, and the instrument's leather belts, broken rulers, branches, pliers still bearing Jeanette's blood and tissue. Jeanette's siblings testified, their voices breaking, that Angela forced them to watch or even participate in the beatings. CPS records, ignored time and again, revealed a devastating systemic failure. This could have been prevented, Grant told the jury, locking eyes with them. Jeanette cried out for help, and no one listened. Angela's defense shifted the blame to her violent childhood, her murdered mother, her abusive father claiming she was merely disciplining a difficult child. She denied the extent of the abuse, dismissing the injuries as accidents, but her words crumbled under the weight of evidence and testimony. Richard claimed he was often away driving trucks, painting himself as an outsider, yet records showed he was present for the abuse, even discussing ways to conceal Jeanette's condition. Angela sat motionless, eyes cold, never shedding a tear, even as photos of her daughter's shattered body filled the courtroom screens. The trip to McDonald's while Jeanette lay dying made jurors shudder. Richard feigned remorse, claiming he feared Angela, but the calm in his 911 call laid bare his complicity. They acted like it was nothing, one juror later said, like Jeanette was nothing. On August 25, 2011, after a month-long trial, the jury took only 2 hours to deliberate. The verdict: guilty on all counts. Angela was sentenced to death, becoming the only woman on Oregon's death row since 1984 for first-degree murder, torture, and aggravated child abuse. Richard received life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years, for failing to protect Jeanette and aiding in covering up the crime. Judge Thomas Carter, his voice like steel, delivered the final words. "You turned a home into a slaughterhouse. Jeanette deserved love, not this." In 2020, Oregon's death penalty reforms commuted Angela's sentence to life without parole. As of August 14, 2025, Richard remains incarcerated, with no news of parole. The courtroom broke into sobs, shattering the heavy silence. Jeanette's teachers, wearing purple ribbons, clung to one another. Justice had come, but it was hollow, for nothing could bring back the little girl who once dreamed of wings. Jeanette's death sent shockwaves through Eugene, Oregon, and soon across the nation. Her funeral drew 100 mourners, teachers, classmates, neighbors, all weighed down by grief and the guilt of not being able to save her. On social media, posts erupted in anger, condemning CPS for ignoring reports from Amber Davis, her teacher, and from Lynn McCanney. How many times did we fail her? One post read, shared thousands of times. Candlelight vigils lit up parks across Eugene, with soft purple flames flickering in her memory. Her case became a rallying cry, fueling campaigns to reform CPS, demanding faster responses and better training to identify abuse. Jeanette's own poem, read at her funeral, became a symbol of stolen dreams, urging action to protect the vulnerable. Jeanette's voice lives on in her poetry, in the purple ribbons, in the grief of those who loved her. Let her legacy roar against silence. If you suspect a child is being abused or neglected, call the Child Protection Hotline or your local agency immediately. Do not hesitate. Do not second guess. Your call could save a life. Share Jeanette's story not for the sorrow, but to awaken vigilance. She dreamed of flying to heaven. Make sure no other child gets there too soon. We are their voice. We are their shield. For Jeanette, never turn away again.